Good morning. Thank you for tuning in to Voice of Reason Boston. This morning we have our special guest. Her name is Samantha Calero, and Samantha is the Executive Director of the Youth Advocacy Foundation. Did I say that right?
Yep.
Thank you, Samantha, for coming in. And Samantha will be telling us what the foundation is all about and what she does in her community. Samantha, we are very happy to have you here this morning. How are you?
I'm really well. Thank you so much for having me. This is a wonderful opportunity.
Not a problem at all. If you can let our viewers know and our listeners know a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So thank you again for having me. My name is Samantha. I'm the director of the Youth Advocacy Foundation. I've been in my position for about 2 years.
Okay.
And I come from the world of violence intervention and prevention and trauma response. And the way I identify really is as a youth worker.
Okay.
I'm extremely passionate about justice and empowerment for young people, particularly young people of color in the city of Boston.
That's excellent. So as a director, what do you do at the Youth Advocacy Foundation?
Well, we are a small shop, so I wear many hats. The Youth Advocacy Foundation is special because we are a supporting organization of the juvenile public defenders.
Okay.
So the Youth Advocacy Division of the Committee for Public Counsel Services. And our mission is to shut down the school-to-prison pipeline, but more broadly, it's about ending the criminalization of young people.
Okay. Right. So let's step back a little bit. What is your background as far as your education and where you're from? Just to get a feel about what you're doing in our community.
So I'm a proud first-generation Latinx woman.
Wow.
My dad is from Ecuador.
Okay.
My mom's family is Finnish, American. I've lived in Boston for like 11 years at this point,
Okay.
and I'm originally from this area.
Okay.
I went to UMass Amherst, and I'm proud to say I just graduated with my bachelor's degree.
Woo!
Yeah.
Excellent.
And within that time period, I spent many years working in grassroots organizing, in education justice, but over time developing kind of unintentional but parallel career track of trauma response to homicide and other critical violence, violence intervention and prevention. So previously I've worked in medical institutional settings,
Okay.
In small community-based organizations. What brought me to the Youth Advocacy Foundation was over a decade. I have to say I was absolutely heartbroken and infuriated by what I saw year in, year out. And I really wanted to work at the root of the issues, which I saw as criminalization of our communities of color,
Okay.
of mass incarceration, and just almost the death by 1,000 paper cuts that
Okay.
a lot of young people go through when they're just trying to grow up.
Okay. That's good to know. At the foundation, what for people who are listening to us and tuning in, what is youth advocacy? Like, what is that? Because I was doing my research as usual, and I'm like, oh, I never heard about this foundation or organization. I would love to know, and I'm pretty sure everyone else would love to know a little bit more about, what this foundation is all about. I believe you guys are 20 years old.
Yeah, almost.
Yeah.
So for almost that entire time, we were a volunteer-led foundation that supported the unfunded aspects of juvenile defense in Massachusetts.
And you guys are not funded by the government.
We're not.
Right.
Well, that's not entirely true. Most of
Okay.
our funding comes from private foundations, from
Okay.
corporate sponsorships. We're incredibly fortunate that we just were awarded a grant through the Office of Juvenile justice and delinquency prevention
Oh,
to
wow.
prevent young people from recidivating actually in probation.
Okay.
By giving them access to education advocacy and better methods of interface with the different professionals throughout their trajectory in the legal system. Funded the division's first social worker, for example.
What's, yeah.
Youth Advocacy Foundation.
I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. We've been able to fund research projects or
Okay.
policy advocacy initiatives. Right now, our cornerstone initiative, the heart of our work, is supporting the Ed Law Project.
Right.
And so, in essence, we are a legal aid organization that provides attorneys for children who are getting pushed out of school and into the criminal legal system.
Okay. And what is the main objective for the foundation?
So we say it's shutting down the school to prison pipeline.
Right.
And that's a term that a lot of folks are becoming familiar with. It's essentially a variety of ways that children and young people, while studying at school or in after school time, are getting either actively or insidiously criminalized. And what we know is that the less access that they have to a high quality public education, which is their right, the more likely they are to become criminalized and eventually incarcerated and disenfranchised as an adult. We've also seen over the years a very troubling increase of other pipelines to incarceration and marginalization, including the foster care to prison pipeline, and also the school to deportation pipeline, which uniquely impacts immigrant children.
Right,
and
especially
families.
what's going on now.
It's really, really worrying. And I think when we take a step back from thinking about school to prison, what we're really looking at is the myriad ways that kids get turned out, that they get denied access, and how that is rooted in structural racism and white supremacy. And so where a lot of, I think, the attention has been paid around school to prison, what we have to recognize is that these systems of oppression are dynamic and they're responsive. And so as time goes on, they're evolving to push kids out in other directions. And so that, I think, is really what we are attendant to.
Okay, great. So for nearly 20 years, the foundation have been working to defend Massachusetts and most vulnerable youth. What are the successes for that?
I mean, I think what I have to say is just a big shout out to the Ed Law Project and the incredible team of attorneys that I have the honor of working with.
Okay.
They're an incredibly passionate group of women who fight relentlessly and zealously to advocate for the young people that they represent. And so where a child would be suspended or expelled or arrested, they fight really hard and get a better outcome. Another way that they advocate for change, and we do get a lot of wins, is for children with disabilities, that when a school is not appropriately equipped to attend to the child's special needs, it's easier to kick them out or push them out.
Of course, yeah.
Rather than increasing their individualized education program.
We're giving them special help in order to, get them moving forward instead of backpedaling and making them stay behind.
Yeah. And I know we just started talking, but if I would leave our listeners with anything, I would just have to say how ridiculous it is that a family, after fighting and advocating and trying all manner of partnership or working with the school, that they have to get a lawyer involved in order to get the child what they need.
That's sad.
And also, it happens to so many different families, and there are resources out there, including the Ed Law Project, including some really amazing partners that we get to work with in our network. Aside from the legal work, juvenile defense in Massachusetts is really I think, at the cutting edge in some important ways of thinking about how we can reform the juvenile justice system and how we can do better by our most vulnerable young people.
Yeah.
And we have some really incredible partners that think deeply about these issues and where we can plug in, whether it's legislative advocacy or research or supporting folks to do creative projects in the field. We try to plug in where is appropriate.
Right. And then again, some of the key success includes changing how Massachusetts interact with the youth, which is very important. You have, the police and the youth. Youth can be rebellious sometimes, but it's okay. Sometimes they're rebelling against what's going on in home or any depression or abuse, bullying. And I think there should be a way where we can change the way we approach things and sit down and talk as a collective to find what would be the most appropriate way to interact with these youth. Because some of these kids, they do something and then they don't even think about what they're doing at the same time. But once they get into the criminal justice system, it follows them into adulthood.
Absolutely.
When you go to court, you look at their board of probation records, you always see that the whatever case they had when they were a juvenile. And it's really important for us to, sit down and talk about the interaction with the youth, how we can better have a how should I say it, a better mechanism of reaching out and listening to them and finding a way to make it work for everyone.
Yeah. I think, too, there's extensive research in the youth development field that across races and ethnicities, kids act out and experiment roughly at the same rate.
Yes.
But some kids are getting locked up and charged and getting sent to prison away from their families, and other kids never get the cops called on them in the first place.
Sometimes they get overcharged for you. Sometimes you can see it's just a larceny between he took my phone from a friend, and then sometimes they get charged as armed robbery. So you have that as well.
So absolutely, we have to, I think, be really critical about the ways that the police are being utilized in which communities, the ways that different police forces are empowered to surveil and trap certain kids where that's not the experience in other communities. There are deep inequities across the country, but Massachusetts actually has among the worst in the entire country.
Wow.
It is dead last in terms of the rate at which we lock up Latinx and Black young people, in terms of the gaps in education outcomes. We're heralded as having the best public schools in the country, and that's true and we have to examine the if.
Right.
And the ways that we respond to some kids versus others.
Yeah.
I'm heartened that diversion is becoming a much more thought about and practiced aspect of the juvenile legal system.
Okay.
We have a really exciting partnership with the Department of Probation and the juvenile courts, with the Department of Youth Services, to look at the young people that are most at risk of recidivating, so the most at risk of getting caught up with probation and going back into
reoffending again.
And so figuring out what are the appropriate interventions for them and how can they be supported in ways that aren't going to kind of keep them going deeper into the pipeline.
And one thing that you said that stood out to me, which is one of the successes of the foundation, is calling attention to the grave injustice that is sentencing juveniles to life without parole. That's one of the things that that stuck out with me. How important is that for people to know?
I think it's important. I mean, the laws changed, which is great, and also there's still much work to be done.
Right.
The truth is that teenagers or young people don't stop developing neurologically or physiologically until about 25 years of age.
Right.
And actually, exposure to trauma further retards that. And so to look at a 17-year-old or 18-year-old or even older, like a 20-year-old, and say, you are absolutely responsible for what you may have done, and so you should be essentially punished in the same way that a 35-year-old is,
Right.
Is not only, I think, cruel and a huge setup for that young person, it also just very fundamentally goes against the science.
Yeah, we know that some of them don't even mature as fast as we would think because of their age, and they're still in that childhood mentality. So that could affect gravely when they go into the system.
Yep. Yep.
Okay, so that's good to know. So for those who are listening, you said something about the new diversion program. I know what that is, but can you explain so that some of our listeners who don't understand what that is all about?
Yeah, so the juvenile justice system in Massachusetts, you can almost look at it like this huge ecosystem. There are all different agencies and stakeholders and different folks in the mix. And that includes, child protection or welfare, so the Department of Children and Families. It includes the public schools. It includes advocacy groups like ours. It includes the defenders, the district attorney's office, right, probation. So across, DYS is a huge stakeholder in this, and I think one of the champions of looking at diversion. If you look across the whole ecosystem, I think the concept of diversion, so diverting kids or directing them in to an alternative program or intervention that sits either outside of or adjacent to the court system has been proven to be really promising and less traumatic than sort of continuing and going through the typical court.
It's kind of like, I'll give you a certain amount of period to prove to us that, this is not who you are. And then after that time period is over, then it doesn't go on your record.
It depends.
It depends on the charge.
Yeah, and I have to, say I'm not an attorney, and so the nuances of
it's a little different.
Those is beyond what I can really speak to.
That's fair enough. And you mentioned the Ed Law Project. Can you tell me what that is?
Sure. So the Ed Law Project has a few different buckets of work or facets. The first is that the team represents children and young people who are getting pushed out of school.
Okay.
And so that happens in a few ways. The first way that I think is the most visible is that a kid is getting suspended or expelled or even arrested. And it's not fair. Oftentimes, the behaviors that are at issue are rooted in a disability or in trauma. And instead of the administration attending to it in-house through a restorative or reparative process, it's become much more common to kick the kid out or arrest them.
And it's much easier because they don't have to deal with it.
And post-Columbine, there was a veritable explosion in the number of school-based police officers, many of whom don't have training in youth development. They may or may not be fully trained police officers, but they're there with the express sort of mission to surveil the school community and step in. And not for nothing, when your tool is a hammer, all the world is nails.
Right.
And so it creates a particular conflict, I think, for our most vulnerable kids. The second way that our attorneys get involved is for students with disabilities or special needs who are not getting the support that they are legally entitled to in order to thrive and succeed. And so that can look like a much more sort of slow suck to the margins that may or may not be actively criminalized. Our team also does a ton of training and capacity building.
Okay.
So our goal is to transform the juvenile and child welfare bar in Massachusetts. It's almost 1,000 attorneys
Wow.
who see upwards of 25,000 children every year in court. We want them to be zealous education advocates.
That's good.
Anytime a kid is in front of them, we want them to be asking and thinking about what's going on for you at school and can you be better supported there? And the answer is usually yes.
Yes, it is. As long as you can provide the support and the youth or that child that you're working with sees that there's a backing. Oftentimes these children or these kids, they don't have that support. So when they see that there's someone supporting them, they may not fully get it at that point, but eventually it'll come around that someone really cares. And I think it's very important that we have this kind of foundation, and we should have more of them, because that will help keep the youth from reoffending, because the youth ultimately is going to be the future. So if we don't have these proper things in place, how is it that we're going to have a better community?
Yeah, I think it speaks volumes about our society in the ways that we fund or don't fund supports for our children and what our expectations are. I think in certain communities as well, there's almost this baseline expectation that children will be traumatized and that they'll grow up through extreme toxic stress and with all of the barriers that many of them face. What outcomes are we really asking of them? It can be frustrating, I think, at times to tinker at the margins and say, oh, well, if we need, and social emotional learning is important, but to say, oh, we need to implement this program in important ways, it's not attending to, I think, the root causes of why we're in this situation in the first place.
And I thank you so much for coming so that we can have this open dialogue, so that people can hear, about the Ed Law Project, because it's one of the main programs within the Youth Advocacy Program Foundation. And it's good. People may not agree, people may disagree, but it's good to have an open discussion about certain things that are happening in our community, because if we don't grow, if we don't help and talk about certain things that are happening, then we agree with what's happening. And our community needs to be aware, and people need to know what the Youth Advocacy Foundation is all about. And I know, the Ed Law Project, it has initiative, and it's also part of the Committee of Public CPCS. And it's also in Family Law and Youth Advocacy Division. But what does the team offer the students in difficult situations?
One thing that I think is really powerful that I've seen from the attorneys that I get to work with is just sitting with a family after they've been through such
traumatic experience.
It's bananas what some families have to go through and the ways that they are often mistreated by the school that their child attends. But just to sit with them and to hear their story and say, I believe you and I'm on your side. Our attorneys practice through an expressed interest model rather than, expressed wishes versus best interest. And so what that means is that they really deeply listen to families and attend to what their priorities are and then try to find the best options for them, but continually going back and say, what do you think about this? And giving the family the leadership to navigate in collaboration with them rather than a directive of, oh, I think this is the best option, so we're going to go this way. And they fight really, really hard. And I think for families who are made vulnerable, and a lot of our families that we work with are not just dealing with school-based issues, or they might be dealing with trauma, they might be dealing with poverty, they might be dealing with domestic violence. There are a number with with immigration concerns.
Exactly. Some
That
of them
the
may
level
not even be sending their kids to school because they're afraid.
the level of stress just gets stacked and stacked and stacked, and I haven't yet met a parent who comes to our organization that's been sitting back and saying like, well, I don't really know what to do. It seems that across the board, people have exhausted their options.
Okay.
And getting an attorney involved is just the last possible option. And so I'm glad we're there as a resource, and also we have to change our system.
Yeah. And what suggestions would you have for families or a mother or a father who is in a position where they don't know what to do? What is the best way of reaching out for support and help?
Yeah. I think, a lot of systems in the United States, particularly for our communities, for immigrant communities, communities of color, there's just this really subtle tilt towards criminalizing, towards blaming, towards disempowering. And what I would say to families, particularly parents, is you're the expert in your children's lives. You know them the best. If something feels wrong, then it probably is wrong.
Right.
So trust your struggle, trust what you know to be true, and don't give up, because there are advocates out there who are ready to throw down alongside you. We're one program, and there are other incredible programs in the city and across the state, actually, that fight really hard on this issue.
It's good to know.
Yeah.
And also it's good to know for people, it's good for our audience and people who are tuning in to know that these attorneys are well trained. You provide support and training for them so that they can understand when they get a case with a family, how to go about dealing with that case. How important is that for your attorneys and to get the support that they need to do their job well?
Support from whom?
From us, from your organization.
I mean, I think it takes the entire community, and everybody has a role to play in building the world that I think we all want to see for our kids and our grandkids. And so while we have one lane and one way of attending to this, I think other people, whether it's through community organizing or advocating at the school committee or running for office, supporting the local community center, there are many ways that we can plug in. I think, for our attorneys specifically, it depends on the case.
Because you don't know what kind of case you're going to get. You don't know what the underlying situation is until you get it. Okay.
But, for families whose child is court involved, whether through a care and protection case with DCF or the juvenile courts, so a delinquency or a youthful offender case, the Ed Law Project is absolutely available as a resource for free.
Oh, wow.
Because we're partnered with the public defenders in that way, you or your child can ask for that extra layer of legal support.
Wow, that's excellent.
For kids that are not court involved, we are incredibly fortunate to have a pro bono panel of attorneys from all different firms and practices around the city who have stepped up to volunteer their time and advocate for those kids.
That's excellent. That's good to know.
They're fantastic. We're very, very lucky.
Let's look at your advocacy, your foundation's advocacy. I know the foundation advocates for raising the age, juvenile life without parole, school to prison pipeline. We really didn't discuss school to prison pipeline. Can we discuss it a little bit more?
Sure.
Yeah.
So in terms of our advocacy, we were part of a larger juvenile justice coalition, and a number of allies that over the past several years, but it came to fruition earlier this year that a huge set of bills were passed through our Massachusetts state government,
Okay.
and Governor Baker signed a lot of it, not all.
Good.
So we didn't get everything that we wanted, but there
But you
was
got
quite
most,
a bit.
right.
One of the important wins, there's a law that was called Disturbing School Assembly,
Okay.
which was a blanket charge that children were getting charged for throwing a juice box, for having a temperature tantrum,
Wow.
for throwing a snowball, for I'm trying to think of some others, for storming out of a classroom. So it's hard to sit with that
Mhm.
seriously, but those are the ways that kids are getting dragged into court. And again, it's happening in some communities and it's
Yeah.
not happening in others. So kids being kids has been getting criminalized. And so over the past year, we were able to do away with that, which is a huge win. And now the coalition is looking at the contracts between local police departments and schools and offering guidance on best practices so that
I think
there's
that's very important. Yes.
more transparency, there's more restraint, and hopefully better training so that kids aren't unnecessarily getting
being charged or arrested for just throwing a basketball. Like, even now, not even youth are being targeted. We see in our country where not too long ago, I think a couple of days ago, this woman was at a CVS trying to use a coupon, and the sales associate called the police on them just
Yep.
for that. So it's not only the youth, but people across the board are being targeted just for their race.
It's unbelievable.
And it's sad
And-
that, we're not talking about this more. We're not doing anything more about it.
Yeah. No, I think you hit the nail on the head. People going about their daily business and their private lives. Like, there was a gentleman who was listening to a yoga CD in his car and had
Wow.
the police called on him. There's like a story every week, and it's happening to adults. It's happening to children for just being children. And it has devastating consequences.
Yes, PTSD, I believe.
People, I think, need to sit into the discomfort of really thinking about and feeling through what must it be like to get arrested as a child, how dehumanizing that experience is, and what does that do to a child's sense of self-worth,
Mental health.
their hopefulness, their mental health. That's why diversion is important, not just because kids make mistakes that are developmentally appropriate
Right.
and they need a second chance. It's also because the courtroom, prisons, are not appropriate places for our babies to be.
No,
They're just not.
absolutely not. Absolutely not. And I see, when I was working for the DA's office, how these young kids would come in not really thinking what they just done, but also the lack of understanding and education of what the process is in the criminal justice. And some of them still don't get it. That's why, as a community, we need to have these discussions. What is it are we willing to do to put a stop to this madness?
And I think another thing that doesn't get talked about often enough is the ways that vulnerability gets criminalized and the way that survivorship gets criminalized. The most vulnerable children are the ones that are most likely to get
Right.
arrested and caught up. And instead of wrapping around them and supporting them or their families,
Or finding out what the root of the problem is.
it's filing a 51A, it's calling the police, it's trumping up charges, through the prosecutor's power, and it might not be one huge cataclysm, right? It might not be one disaster, although it often is. However, I think in my experience as a youth worker, and certainly now in my kind of bird's eye view, working with the defenders, it is that death by 1,000 paper cuts. It's one thing after another over years. I don't know a single child that aspires to be a robber
No.
or a drug dealer
Absolutely not.
or gang involved, but I think as adults, it's really incumbent on us to look at the ways in which they get turned out and what we need to do to do
help
better.
them, from reoffending or getting caught up in situations. Sometimes it's not always a single parent home that the child is coming from. It could be a two-parent home. Sometimes the child just needs that one attention but gets it from the wrong people, and then they get themselves in a position where they're, doing something that they never thought they would do. And it's all about educating. It's all about open communication. It's all about resources, like you mentioned. We have resources. If a parent doesn't know, what's going on with a child and their mental health is not where it needs to be, they can always go into court and petition for a section. There's resources out there that people need to know. We can help these youth from reoffending. We can help these youth from being in a position where they should never be. Because we all was young before. I could have done something stupid, but it's by the grace of God that I'm able to walk in a path that was good for me. I've always said anyone can be in the criminal justice system at any given time. But what is it as a community that we're going to do to talk about these situations? And what are we going to do as far as putting a stop to this? It's really heartbreaking to see our youth being in a position, especially in the criminal justice system. Sometimes people, once they get a case, they come back again. And it feels like they're getting sucked in each and every day and there's no way out.
Yeah.
But there is help. Just like the Youth Advocacy provides help and resources for these youth for not reoffending.
Yeah, and the school to prison pipeline is one way that a young person can be disempowered or pushed to the fringes. Over the years, and again, before I took this role, I had the honor of working with young people who had been victimized multiple times by violence, sometimes had perpetrated really terrible violence, and were barely surviving. Many had pretty profound mental illnesses from all the trauma that they experienced, were in and out of prison, and, a lot of them aren't alive today.
That's okay.
And what I've come to appreciate or understand is, thank you, where I think there was a really incredible opportunity for schools and the networks supporting schools to step up. From a very early age, they were not getting what they needed.
Right.
And they were told again and again by many adults that they did not belong at school. And when you say that, either overtly or just
the
subtly,
power of words.
that, children are sponges. They notice so much.
Even if you don't think they're noticing.
They pick up on it. And those messages, they internalize them. And so then 10 years later, 12 years later, well, where do you think they're going to end up?
Right. Especially if they don't have that support at home.
And I think that there is a narrative about, youth of color and sort of street involvement that is problematic and needs to be challenged. I've also had the honor and pleasure of working with young people who have been top of their class and have gone on to college, and I'm getting old. They're now in the workforce with me, and just a diversity of life experiences. But I think when we talk with each other and run into each other, the question of criminalization and the ways that young people get turned out and pushed out does seem to be a common thread in one way or another.
Yeah.
It happens to so many families, and for some folks, the more they're dealing with, it's a disaster. And for others, they can move through it, but it still leaves its scars.
Yeah, you're right. I feel like, that's why I cannot thank you enough for coming here and just having this conversation with me. And for our viewers and our Facebook listeners who are watching us, it's very important as a community. We have a voice. You know, if there's something that is not right in your community, people need to speak up. People need to make the change, because they're not going to make the change for us. You know, we need to stand up and see what is right and what is wrong. And the things that are not right, we need to stand up as a community, as a collective, to say something. We can talk for days about what needs to be done, but if we're not actually putting our best foot forward, then nothing's going to happen. And I thank you for your work, and I thank you for everything that you've done so far, and you will continue to do for your community. The Youth Advocacy Foundation must be very lucky, because you are a great asset to their foundation.
Thank you.
If you can, give us where people can get information on the website, any upcoming events, anything that would help people to know more about the work that you guys do and how to get involved to keep this work going forward.
Sure. www.youthadvocacyfoundation.org is our website. You can also follow us on Twitter and Facebook.
Okay.
We have a calendar of events that are going to be published soon about what we're looking forward to over the upcoming year. But what I would say is, and on our website, the Ed Law Project, their full information is there as well if you need help. Or if you just have a question and you're not sure, please do call us. And in terms of ways of getting involved, I think one of the benefits about being a part of a huge state agency is that there are different ways to advocate for policy changes at the state level or at the city level. There are opportunities to volunteer with us and just to sit around a table and give a voice to what so many people go through. And we exist because our community exists, and if we're not doing something that you're passionate about or that lands on what your family's experiences are, it would be a pleasure to direct you to the folks who are doing it. But I think, in this moment of looking at the power of a prosecutor, or the difference a DA makes, right? What the ACLU is doing and all of these other groups, it's important to recognize that we all have skin in the game on this.
Yes.
We cannot continue to incarcerate at the highest rate in the world.
It's true.
We cannot continue to neglect our kids at a systemic level to the extent that kids are walking out of 12th grade with a second grade reading level. It's just simply unacceptable.
Yeah, and the community also needs to know the power that they have.
Absolutely.
You got to get up and vote. If you're not voting, you can't say anything. You can't get mad. You have to get up and vote. We have a lot of candidates that are running for the Suffolk County District Attorney's Office.
Yes.
There's a good variety, a different ethnicity, something that we have not seen in a while. And it's very important for people to get to know each and every one of them. Each and every one of them brings something to the table. We may not like all of them, but someone has something that the community needs, and people need to get up and vote.
Yep. One shout out I can make is to the I Have a Future Coalition. They are hosting a youth-led forum of all of the district attorney candidates coming up on August 9th. And it's going to be right in downtown Boston. And it's a Facebook event, so you can find it there. Again, it's the I Have a Future Coalition.
Okay.
So I think...
Can they go on Facebook and get it too?
So relevant to this conversation, in thinking about the issues that uniquely impact young people.
Yeah.
Some
It's
incredible young people from our communities have stepped in to do the
and
work.
What is it called again?
I Have a Future Coalition. It's the District Attorneys Forum.
Okay, I'll be sure to put that on my Facebook page as well, so that I can share it around, because it's important. If you're 18 and you can vote, go out and vote. And again, Samantha, I cannot thank you enough.
Yeah,
You
thank
touched
you so
my
much.
heart today. I cannot thank you enough. And we need to continue to have these dialogues.
Yes.
And to all my listeners and people who are viewing, please get up and vote. If you have a voice, go ahead and vote. You know,
September 2nd is the primary.
I believe it's September. Yeah, you may be right. I'm not sure, but
Probably not.
we'll be posting it up so
Right on.
people.
It's coming up.
Yeah. So just get up and vote. You know, we're not always going to agree with everyone, but as long as we have an open dialogue to make a change, then the change can happen. I believe it.
Yes.
I truly believe that. And, you know, if you have any questions for Voice of Reason Boston, if there's any topics that you guys would like to hear, definitely email me, voiceofreasonboston@gmail. Check out, subscribe to my page at Voice of Reason Boston. I'm on Instagram at Voice of Reason of Boston. It was a pleasure again having you, and I thank my listeners for tuning in and listening in. You guys are the ones that's helping me to continue to do this work. Sometimes I feel like backing out, but I'm getting the support that I need, and I'm not doing this for myself. I feel like I've been in a position where I've worked for the Commonwealth, and I see what's going on, and I have the voice, so I'm going to go ahead and share it with the community, because the community has the power.
Yes.
The community is the one that's putting people in office, so the community needs to know. Thank you for tuning in to Voice of Reason Boston. We'll see you again.
Thank you.